Thank you, Ken, Ozzy, Jeremy, and Jeremy for such a great panel. For this panel, we're going to talk about e-closing solutions and do a demonstration. First, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. We have Tim Anderson, who's the SVP Director of Digital Strategy at Mortgage Connect. Tim will be moderating the panel. We also have Nancy Pratt, who's a Strategy Business Manager for Black Knight, and Brian Pinnell, Chief E-Services Executive for DocMagic. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Beth. Hey, my part of the session, I want to give you guys a quick overview, kind of what RON actually is and what it really means to you guys out there. Remote online notary has been around for a while now. The beauty and advantages of RON is it allows smaller companies to compete with the big guys and basically allows you to close anywhere, any place online. So even though you might be a small player in one branch, you can basically close anywhere in North Carolina at any point in time and provide that service. So it really allows you to expand your opportunities and your relationships and your footprint there as well. Plus, it offers a level of convenience that you can be anywhere, anytime and schedule an online closing without physically drive out somewhere and meet people, they're running late or whatever. Everything can be done online, which is a huge advantage for everybody. This next slide will kind of cover really a little bit of the legislation that's happened out there. You'll all have heard the difference between probably the Virginia law and the other laws. Virginia allows you to basically be a notary, a Virginia notary, and basically close anywhere in any state. Most lenders, underwriters, and state associations don't like that. They like to have coverage and jurisdiction within the state that you are, like North Carolina. But in terms of adoption, because of COVID, we've literally seen just this year alone, almost 25 RON bills introduced this year and 28 states enacting permanent RON bills. We'll probably see another 25 take their permanent ones and expand them. So we're going to see mass adoption of remote online this year. In terms of adoption in the industry, we currently have over 20 warehouse lenders funding e-notes, over 20 investors now buying e-notes. And one of the big adoption problems we had here with North Carolina was getting the Federal Loan Bank on board. They're coming online now to be able to collateralize and insure e-notes. And also you got to have servicers. So over 10 servicers and sub-servicers now have e-vaults to service e-notes. And then if you're a large shop that has a doc custodian, all the three major doc custodians now can also support e-notes. So you've got major adoption by all the industry players now to be able to support this. This next slide really covers how much has really changed since January. E-notes and registers through MERS is basically doing a full e-closing. You need to be able to do an e-note. And MERS is the way that you register to show that it's legal, that the legal note is actually an authoritative copy, it's been transferred to the right parties, and it's who owns the rights to that note. So MERS, really back in January, did a little bit 15,000 e-notes in January. Just this last month alone, we've actually did over 66,000. So between January and October of this month, you've seen almost a tripling of volume, and that is a huge tick up in terms of adoption. It's just mass adoption because of COVID, because digital mortgages, it's happening. This slide here actually then shows you how many states with the stars actually have enabled or are going to enable remote online notary laws permanently. And so you can see this is taking the states and actually by storm, because this is really going to be one of the prevailing methods that people want to do business going forward. So that was kind of an overview of RON and adoption. And what we want to show you next now is actually a live demo of a RON transaction from a consumer's perspective. So this will give you a really look and feel of what it looks like from an end user perspective. And we can show you what a RON transaction looks like for you. And so we'll roll the video next.
Hello, and welcome to our demonstration. Today, we will show you how Pavaso's technology empowers lenders, title companies, and real estate attorneys to complete remote online e-closings, also known as Remote Online Notarization, or RON. With Pavaso's RON tool, the entire closing can be completed digitally and remotely. This option allows parties to attend the closing remotely, using two-way audio-video technology to electronically sign and notarize documents in states that have adopted specific RON legislation. One of the biggest benefits of the Pavaso platform is a title company or attorney firm's state-commissioned remote e-notaries can perform the remote online notarizations, or you can use your current signing agency and join as an observer. Let's start with creation and configuration of the transaction. You will be invited to create an account under your company by email. You will use your login credentials to access all of your closing transactions in Pavaso. When logged in, you will see a dashboard and should select the Digital Close Enterprise web application. Next, you will enter your 6-digit PIN as a second layer of authentication to be able to see the order lobby, which displays all past, current, and upcoming closing transactions. As we go through this demonstration, we will continue to refer to the transaction as an order, since that is how it is referred to in the system. For a RON transaction, the Remote Closing and Video e-Notary checkbox needs to be selected to indicate that the closing for this order will be performed remotely. On this page, the closing documents provided by both lenders and title companies or attorney firms are brought together into a consolidated view, delivering the most current documents and information to the customer. There are two ways documents can easily be added to an order. Pavaso can either leverage existing integrations or establish new ones with a lender's doc prep provider, a title production system, or documents can be added by a simple upload. Let's open a document to see the signature, notary, and other tags that have been applied to it. To further streamline the process, the system is designed to automatically place the appropriate tags into each document, either through information passed via the integration or via saved tag templates customized for your company. However, if needed, you can always add or modify tags on each document. Once documents are ready for your customer to review, the lender or title user will select the Invite Borrowers to Pre-Closing button to invite them into the order. In this example, we are using only one buyer to keep it simple, but both buyers and sellers can be invited to an e-closing transaction. Your customer will receive an email invitation to create a Pavaso account so they can access their closing documents. They will use the link in the email to create a unique username and password. The customer will then select the Digital Close web application and create a 6-digit PIN for a second layer of security to access their order. When an order is accessed for the first time, the customer is presented with a Uniform Electronic Transaction Act or UETA disclosure. They will accept it and consent to the electronic delivery of documents and indicate their intention to sign electronically during the closing. You will receive a notification by email if the customer declines the UETA disclosure. However, the customer can still opt in to e-sign the closing documents at the settlement. With Pavaso, your customers can better prepare for their closing by having digital access to review their closing documents ahead of the closing. You also have the ability to offer a centralized educational library within the Pavaso platform. Materials can be provided to customers in different formats and be linked directly into corresponding documents, leading to a more educated and better informed customer. They can go over each document anywhere, on most internet-enabled devices, and customers can take as much time as they need. Once they reach the last page of a document, a button will instruct them to confirm the document. If all the information is correct, the customer will select the Confirm button to see the next document for review. At any point during the transaction, the customer has two secure options for communicating with their closing team. They can use the notification option to begin an online chat with a closing team member or send them a private message. When the customer finishes reviewing all documents, they select the Continue button on the top of the pre-closing review page. They will be redirected to a summary page where they can select the Complete button and verify this action in the next pop-up. Once the customer completes this step, the platform notifies you that the customer has completed their pre-closing document review and the order is ready to remotely e-close on Pavaso. Pretty easy, right? Okay, we are now ready to move to the actual signing of the closing documents. Let's look at this from the remote e-notary's perspective first. The day of the closing, the state-certified remote e-notary that you have selected from your signing agency or the assigned title user on the order will log into their Pavaso account to initiate the RON closing. For this demonstration, the actions of the title user will be referred to as the actions of the remote e-notary. If the title user is not the remote e-notary for a transaction, they can still join as an observer. If needed, other members of the closing team, like the loan officer, can join as observers as well. Within the Digital Close Enterprise web application, the remote e-notary will select the Remote Online Closing option and will select Buyer Remote or Seller Remote. At this point, the audio-visual recording of the transaction will begin. At the start of each closing, you must run a system test to ensure the camera, microphone, and speakers are working properly. The system test also validates they are using a compatible browser, and they are directed to install the Pavaso Conference plugin. Now the remote e-notary can set up their digital signature and initials and wait for the customer to finish the system test and digital part of the identity verification process. Now let's look at this from the customer's view. They will also log into their Pavaso account, select the digital closing web application, enter their 6-digit PIN, and open their order. They perform a system test as well to ensure that their device is set up properly and meets the system requirements for the closing. They will use their 6-digit PIN to accept the UITA disclosure, which will verify the use of their electronic signatures for signing, and select the Enter Closing Session button. In accordance with regulations established by many states, they will be prompted to answer a series of knowledge-based questions to confirm their identity, which must be answered correctly to continue the closing. The customer has up to 2 attempts to answer them correctly. After the knowledge-based questions are answered accurately, they can set up their digital signature and initials. Everyone should now be logged into and able to communicate through the Pavaso platform. Before closing can begin, however, a second layer of customer identity proofing must be performed. A picture of the customer's photo ID must be captured and their identity validated. To do this, the customer selects the type of ID they want to use, driver's license, government-issued passport, or state ID, and selects the Validate by Smartphone button, where they will be prompted to enter their phone number. Once complete, the system will send a secure link to their smartphone that will prompt them to capture a photo of the front and back of their ID and submit it to Pavaso, similar to how a mobile check deposit is captured. The submitted photo ID is verified electronically through an accredited third-party system. The remote e-notary can also see the captured photo ID to verify the customer's identity via the camera. Now, let's see how e-signing and e-notarizing the closing documents remotely works. You can use a standard or touchscreen laptop or desktop computer with microphone and camera capabilities to participate in remote online e-closing. To sign the documents, when using a touchscreen laptop, a stylus or a fingertip can be used to draw a signature. When using a standard laptop or desktop, a mouse can be used. Pavaso offers 2 options for applying a customer's signature to closing documents. It is up to you to review and determine what option may be best for you. The first option is Sign Once. When selected, this option can fast-track the e-closing. It autofills the customer's signature on all documents that were previously confirmed by the customer during the pre-closing document review process. As you can see in the first document, the signature and the date field linked to it have automatically populated. The remote e-notary can send a document to the customer for them to view it, allowing the customer to ask specific questions regarding the document or validate their signature. The remote e-notary selects Send Document to Remote Signer and then chooses the customer they want to send the document to in the next pop-up. The customer shares their screen, allowing the remote e-notary to watch their actions. After any questions have been answered and the signature is validated, the customer selects Done, and the document control returns to the remote e-notary. The second option is Sign Each. Regardless of which documents were confirmed during the pre-closing document review process, to sign, the customer will be required to click or tap each individual tag at the closing. This option can still accelerate the signing process, as the customer does not need to physically wet sign each document. Here you can see this document also requires E-Notarization. The system will not allow you to notarize documents until the customer's signature has been applied. The remote e-notary will send the document to the customer. The customer will select the placeholder's signature box, and their signature will be applied. Then, the customer will select Done, and the document control will be returned to the remote e-notary. Since we now have the customer's signature, the remote e-notary can select the placeholder e-notary signature tag, and the system will apply the notary's signature, notary seal, and commission expiration date. The remote e-notary will then select Save to lock in the signatures, and the system will verify required fields on the document were completed before allowing you to move on to the next document. If needed, the remote e-notary can contact Pavaso support by phone and use the RON support button to invite them into the RON session for technical assistance. The Pavaso support member assisting can only see the remote e-notary screen and has no other capabilities. Once all digital actions have been performed, the Buyer Complete button will activate and the audio-visual recording of the transaction will end. The remote e-notary can proceed with finalizing the remote online e-closing and complete an electronic notary journal when required. If a notary journal is completed, the audio-visual recording of the transaction will end at this point. Within the post-closing screen, all permissible parties have access to the signed documents and a PDF audit log. Pavaso safeguards will not allow a transaction to close without capturing all required electronic signatures, reducing over or undersigning. Let's open the audit log to see all the data we tracked during an e-closing transaction. In this file, you can easily see the user that performed each action, a description of the action, which application the action was performed in, the user's IP address, and a timestamp of when the action took place. Remote online e-closing transactions also have a recording of the session available from the remote e-notary's viewpoint. Helpful tool. Additional documents can be added after the closing and made available to other parties as needed. This could include proof of funding or other post-closing documents relevant to the transaction. This concludes our demonstration, showing you just how easy it is to complete a remote online e-closing with Pavaso, and how you and your customers can benefit from a secure platform that allows everyone to communicate with all permissible parties in real time throughout the closing process. Selecting the right technology provider is critical when establishing your digital closing strategy. Pavaso's RON tool provides many benefits, such as give customers the ability to review closing documents and information ahead of the settlement, anytime, anywhere, from a secure platform. Provides a solution for individuals who are not able to attend in person. A title company or attorney firm's state commission remote e-notaries can perform remote online notarizations. Settlement agents maintain control of the transaction by conducting the signing, or, when they choose to use a signing agency, can join as an observer. Standardize your closing process, reduce errors and trailing documents, and make documents available faster for post-closing activities to begin. Gives all permissible parties in the transaction online access to a recording of the completed digital signing and notarizations.
Well, we're back. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I mean, hopefully it give you kind of an overview of what it looks like to do a RON with a consumer out there. And now I'd like to transition in our next speaker, which is Nancy Pratt. She and I have worked together for many years. She's one of the few really experts out there in the field. And she's going to give you a little bit of overview of what's going out there legislatively from a standards perspective and how adoption is going to be supported by that.
Thank you, Tim. Now that you've seen the video, let's talk about how RON actually got started. The first RON was actually done in 2012. So this isn't brand new technology, but only one company and a couple people were doing that, as there really wasn't any regulations around it or anything. So let's go back in time a little bit and talk about how we did get started on that. So in 2017, a group of industry participants got together in Washington, D.C., and really every industry was represented in that meeting. And we started talking about ways we could adopt e-notarization. And in that meeting, we talked about specifically how could we do e-notarization doing it remotely. We didn't have the name of RON yet. We hadn't come up with that acronym, but we all were very interested in ways to make e-closings even easier for some people. And so we sat around that table, we talked about how we could get adoption on face-to-face or in-person e-notarization, but the conversation still kept going back to how can we get remote online notary to be adopted throughout the industry. So we really decided when we left that meeting that we needed to go back, we needed to figure out how we were going to implement this, and that's when we started to work very closely with MISMO. And MISMO is that technical arm of the MBA. It stands for Mortgage Industry Maintenance Organization. And so, it wasn't a brand new concept, but nobody put any rules or regulations around it. And so the fact that when we were working on the CFPB e-closing pilot back in 2014, we were talking about RON at that point. There again, we just said, wouldn't this be something if we could actually do closings by using your computer and not having to go into an office? And the GSEs were very interested in this. The Treasury report later on even urged states to adopt RON. So as we left, we actually spun that work group over into MISMO to set up the guidelines and the standards to adopt RON. So the MISMO, as we were talking about, actually serves the mortgage industry, and it makes the mortgage processes more efficient, less costly for the industry participants and consumers. It's the common language. It's how companies interact with one another, and it's a way that they can enable efficient exchange of information. MISMO lays that groundwork, creates the standards and the foundation for driving that innovation and value. So for the next year, MISMO actually worked on developing standards around remote online notarization. They met every week for over a year, and there were so many participants in those meetings, and everybody had a say in what those standards were going to look like. And the end result was to hopefully be able to come up with an end product that would give the secretaries of states ways to implement RON with some standards so that 50 states wouldn't all be doing their own thing. And so at the end of that, they produced a page and a half, I call it a template, of ways that they could give the industry, if you're going to implement RON, this is what it needs to look like. So there were certain things that were keys to remote online notarization. That was credential verification, knowledge-based authentication, because, there again, you weren't sitting in front of the notary at that point. You had to have good audio visual. You needed to have the audit trail so that you could prove just what happened. And least of all, you needed to make sure that you had the property securities wrapped around that. So we knew there were three kinds of closings. There was the hybrid in person, and those were where people would go into the title companies or the attorney's offices, and they would all sign their documents, wet sign, and then, for years, for the last almost 18, 19 years, we've been pushing face-to-face e-notarization. So we knew that e-notarization in person wasn't going to change any, and now we needed to actually develop the guidelines and the rules around remote online notarization to give that level of comfort to the states as they embrace their rules and regulations, and also to those verticals downstream, the recorders and all of the people that would end up purchasing these loans that were maybe closed using remote online notarization. How do we ID? So we need to make certain that the person that we are remotely notarizing is indeed the person that should be on the other side of that camera. So there's different ways we can do this. We need to run them through what we call a KBA, which is a knowledge-based authentication. So that KBA actually allows the subject to go through and answer some questions, usually 5 questions about themselves, and they have to get 4 of those 5 questions. If they don't get them the first time, then they get one more chance to go through those questions. If they don't get them then they have to wait until the next day. So the questions are really around just things that have happened in your lifetime. And so as long as you've got a credit history and you've been doing things, generally the KBA is not that hard to pass. However, some people, I always make the joke, some people who are older sometimes have a harder problem because they don't always remember if they financed a car through Bank of America 30 years ago. So sometimes that does present some challenges. And then we also need to verify their ID. So what we do on that, we call that credential analysis. The subject holds their ID up, lets the notary see it, but in addition, we have a way that we can authenticate that identification. And we can run that through our phone. It checks the different pieces of the ID to make sure it's an authentic piece of identification. And generally what is used is the driver's license or a passport. So those were a couple ways that we're able to ID the different people, which is really more safe and more secure than we do in paper. When we're doing a paper closing, we're just going to take by face value that is indeed a valid ID. We don't run it through any kind of analysis to make sure it's valid. And so really remote online gives those additional securities, which is probably important because it gives that level of comfort to make sure that the the closing is indeed accurate and secure. So part of that is after you feel comfortable with the identification, you have to make sure that you can see and hear one another. So the audio-visual communication must be in real time. You must be able to have it secure from unauthorized interception. So that's why many times people say you can't use things like Zoom and things like that because you don't always have those securities wrapped around that. It also has to be good enough for the notary to do their job. And when I say that, the notary and the subject even has to be able to see each other. They have to be able to hear each other, and they have to be able to share that record and see that record that's being signed. If for some reason that audio-visual feed fails, then the session has to start over again, and you have to go through KBA and credential analysis all over again. So that's an important thing. Then we also have to make sure that we have proper storage. Most of the secretaries of states have set up as anywhere from a 7 to 10 year rule that the audio visual recording has to be stored for a period of 7 to 10 years. So we need to make sure that we have that storage. Everything needs to be tamper sealed as an additional form of security. We need to make sure that we have a post-execution audit trail so that each document is rendered tamper evident and significant actions must be recorded in that audit trail. The RON systems platforms have to have comprehensive security programs to ensure that privacy and data security, as you can imagine. So those are the template rules, if you will, that MISMO came up with to give to the secretaries of states. And it has been nice to see the adoption on that. The secretaries of states have been very good about asking the platforms, are you RON certified or are you following the MISMO guidelines? Because that then helps them understand there's a set of standards out there that the industry has agreed upon, and it is a good way to adopt RON. So I think once you start doing that, you're going to find that RON is going to open a lot of doors for you and your company in order to increase your business footstep. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass it over to Brian Pinnell, who's going to give you a little more information about RON and ways to adopt it and ways to use it. So take it away, Brian.
Thanks, Nancy. Hi, I'm Brian Pinnell. I am the Chief E-Services Executive at DocMagic. I'm responsible for all of our e-sign activities, which include e-notarization and the Mersey Registries portal, and all the things to do with the closing of an electronic mortgage. So I'm going to talk to you about a few things. First and foremost are going to be the things that could go wrong in a RON transaction. First things off is it's a smooth RON transaction. There's three main investor and legislative requirements. The first being identity proofing or knowledge-based analysis. KBAs is when the signer is asked a bunch of out-of-pocket questions. So they're going to be things about like, where'd you used to live, or out of these 5 cars, what'd you used to own? Things that are pretty simple that you should know, but wouldn't be found on your mail. The second is a credential analysis. And in this avenue, what you need to do is you're going to be presenting a government-issued identification. It could be a license, it could be your passport, anything of that nature that you'd have to have a picture taken of on your screen so a third party could prove out the analysis. Audio-video recordation, which is just really about the fact that the actual event itself needs to be taped and filmed, both audio and video. KBA is run at the beginning of the session for each signer. So the things that where it fails is that you didn't provide enough information to identify the signer. You didn't provide the exact information. So let's say that you had an address that you mistyped. There's not enough data to generate 5 questions. Or you didn't answer the 4 out of 5 questions correctly. And what that really means is it's the 80% rule. So what the requirement is that you get 80% of the questions that you're asked correct. So people talk about it being 4 out of 5 because that's 80%. But some states have less than that requirement as long as it's still 80% of the questions you have right. And then finally, that you've exceeded the number of attempts to actually do and answer the KBA request. In this instance, what ends up happening is some states have it that you can answer again within the same day. Some states require a 24-hour period of a break before you can go back and be asked the questions again. When credential analysis fails is that the validation is happening electronically. So if the signer doesn't follow the instructions that they're given from the tool, if the image or the picture that they're taking is too dark, or it's out of focus or crooked, or if the images really just don't meet the minimum requirements. And again, these are government issued identification items, so therefore you must have something there that somebody can actually recognize and the software can enact upon. So when webcam fails, so prior to the e-notarization session, the notary will reach out to the borrower and all the other participants, looking for them to validate the level of computers that they have, as well as the webcam capabilities and the browsers that they need to use. There are scenarios whereby your browser is just simply not going to work with the software, or you could have internet issues or broadband bandwidth problems. In each of those instances, you may need to get started again or go to a different location to hold the actual closing, because they're going to need to have a clear visual and audio representation of what happened during the signing. So getting started. When you want to get started through this whole thing, the first thing and the most important thing that I recommend to everybody that we work with is do the research. Is e-notarization even approved in your jurisdiction? Because some jurisdictions it's not. Some processes are not approved either. So for example, RONs, which we're talking about today, which are remote online notarization, may be legal, but you may also be able to do a RIN, which is remote in person or ink sign notarization, or you would be able to do some other form of signing that's just not used to or not being described as today's session. You have to understand for how long these legislations are even going to be available, because they may not be available at the time that you want to be doing this. Again, some of these are emergency legislations that end at the end of the summer. Some of them are being carried over to the end of the year. And with this pandemic, we have no idea how long these will last. And is the vendor that you're using approved in your state? Several times the vendor may not be approved in your state, and you have to go out and they have to go through the process to get that approval. And that might be beyond the window that you need to do your closings. Then you need to determine your risk tolerance, long-term and short-term. So is it something that you're willing to do just to get these off the books? Or is it something that you're really committed to and you're going to be a long-term strategy around remote online notarization? And then finally, your investor acceptance. Fannie and Freddie have guidelines out to Ron, and they specifically state how it's going to be done and what states they actually work in and allow. So you need to follow those to make sure that everything you have is in place prior to continuing on and pursuing a Ron closing. Also research your vendors. Do they interface with your existing solution? And what form of e-notarizations do they actually support, which is what I mentioned before. Do they provide what you require? Because your state may require that you need in-state notaries, and that's something that's very important in certain legislation. And some other legislation, you could have out-of-state notaries. And then finally, does that KBA and credential analysis that you have required, what are your state's requirements for that? Because there are certain states that don't require 5 questions in the 80% rule, certain states that have the how many tries you get, and certain states that have information around your credential analysis programs and tools. Then do an impact assessment requirement of the solution itself. Does it meet your lender and originator standpoint? Does it meet your settlement agents that you're going to have to reach out for? Does it work for purchases and refinances? Because those are different when you're not picking a settlement agent that you're used to working with in a refinance, and you have to go with the borrower one in a purchase. Is the notary set up to do it, and the notary that you have in your state available or even capable of doing a RON closing? And then finally, what's the education level of your borrower or seller? Are they comfortable with doing a RON closing? Because you may turn out that they're not comfortable doing that, and they're looking for a different solution for you to offer them. And my final slide is really about what you're going to be doing as the lender themselves. You need to be an e-notarization advocate. So it's something internally and externally you need to push within your own company. There are a lot of companies out there that start getting going and believe this is the path they want to do because they hear it's the next best thing. However, when it gets time to do the actual work, they're not ready to commit to that or ready to proceed to that. So having someone in the company that's that advocate saying that this is something you really want to do and something that you should be doing is that advantageous. And then be prepared for Ron. There's certain things that you're going to have to train. Your people are going to have to change. Your process is going to have to change. Things that you've worked with before aren't going to be exactly the same in the Ron world. So your borrowers also need to be prepared for how this is going to work, especially if you don't already allow for electronic signings today. And then align your changes with your business processes for this new workflow. This is a new workflow for you. A lot of tools are going to mimic the paper world, but the benefit of actually doing something electronically is to do it better. So if we can find a better process and a better user experience, then there may be some changes that you can't do or changes that you need to do that you weren't able to do before. And finally, and most importantly, make sure you're committing to Ron for your e-closings. It's one thing to say that you're going to do a couple. It's one thing to say that you're going to do a few, but to say that this is how we're going to be doing business now is the way that you actually get this to work, and it becomes that long-term benefit that you're looking for. So I hope this was helpful, and I'd like to throw this back to Beth as she has some more things to follow up with you guys on.
Thank you to Tim, Brian, and Nancy. That was great information and a wonderful demonstration as well. That really helps to answer a lot of questions I think people have. Speaking of questions, we're now going to move into our Q&A session. Please submit any questions you have through the chat function, and we'll be glad to answer those in the next 15 minutes.